Greetings folks, it's Michael Raso for the Film Photography Project, and today I'm here to talk about the 1940s Kodak Reliant 8mm home movie camera. This camera takes double 8 film, and I'm just going to go over a few of the functions and show a reel that was actually shot with this very camera. This video isn't intended to take the place of a camera manual, but just to kind of give you a quick start, so to speak, a crash course on how to jump in and start shooting with this camera. This is an all manual 8mm camera. It takes no batteries whatsoever and uses readily available double 8mm film. This is the film that comes on a 25-foot spool and actually runs through the camera twice, shooting side 1, taking the film out, flipping it, and then shooting side 2, because you get 2 8mm frames on one piece of 16mm film. Ingenious. The film is then split, and then you have 50 feet of usable footage. So let's get started really fast. This particular camera, as most 8mm cameras, have a standard 13mm lens. This is a standard D-mount lens, and these lenses do come off if you wanted to replace your lens with, let's say, a wider angle lens or a different D-mount lens. The f-stop on this particular camera is f2.7 and stops all the way down to f16. When you're looking through your camera, through the eyepiece, you won't actually be looking through the lens. It's a parallax view, which means this is not a reflex camera. Of all these reviews that I do assume that folks watching have the basic understandings of photography. At any time, you could email me, michael@filmphotographyproject.com. I'll be happy to answer any questions about this camera. So there's the lens. On this side of the camera, we have our wind. And this is a winding camera. Wind it up. Here's the shutter button right on the side of the camera. This camera will run 16 frames per second all the way up to 48 frames per second. So the norm for this camera in most 8mm cameras is 16 frames per second. If you run faster and you're projecting or scanning at 16 frames per second, that will give you the perception of slow motion. Also note that at 16 frames per second, your shutter speed is approximately 1/30th of a second. If you increase the frames per second, the shutter speed will slightly change. Dense topic for new shooters, I know. Let's keep it basic. Let's shoot at 16 frames per second. Shutter is 1/30th of a second. Above the frame rate is your counter. When you put in a fresh roll of film, you want to reset your camera to F. F for full up. And then on the bottom of your camera, there is a socket for a tripod. On the other side of the camera is a useless chart. I say that because this chart years ago was for the 2 types of film that were available at the time. This camera was manufactured sometime in the 1940s, and there were 2 types of film, black and white and color. And the film sensitivity, or ISO, was not revealed early on to the public. It was just black and white or color, and this guide on the side would tell you what f-stop to set. But these days, the ISO of your film is different. So this chart is useless, and if it's going to confuse you,
that's right, yeah. Yeah.
Here is your button to open up your camera, and it turns like so, and that reveals the film compartment. This camera will take a 25-foot roll of color or black and white film, and you put your full roll right here. Right here, your full roll goes, and you will just follow the lines, thread the camera, thread the film behind the gate. The gate opens up. You can actually see. This actually opens up. Dull side facing the lens, the shiny side facing the back of the camera. And what will happen is, when you're shooting, you will shoot one side of your film and it will get taken up on this camera spool. When the film runs out, take the now full spool, swap it. So take the full spool and put it in the new film side. Take the empty spool that was here and use it as a take-up, and then rethread the film, and now you're shooting the other side of your 16mm strip. You will then shoot that side, and then when you run out of film, your film has conveniently regrouped itself on the original camera roll you put in. So your original camera roll becomes full, you take it out, put it in its black bag or tin, and now you're ready to shoot your next roll. Always remember, your camera spool, the spool that comes with the camera, will always be empty when you're done shooting. Stoops. And that goes back in your camera. And now you're ready for next time. Now, please note that when your camera is open, if the gate is left open, this little gate here, your lid will not close. So once you load your film, you have to close the gate, put on your lid, and now you're ready to shoot. At no time while you're shooting should you open up your film compartment. You will expose your film. Also, when you're loading and changing your roll, do it in very, very dim light. If you're shooting outside at a picnic or an event, duck inside. Try to duck inside and go somewhere where it's very dark and you could just barely see. And that will keep exposure and light leaks down to a minimum. That's really it when it comes to this camera. Probably the most challenging thing you'll find is what f-stop do you set your lens to? And that is determined by your shutter speed, which is 1/30th of a second at 16 frames per second. Remember the 16 frames per second. So if you have your shutter speed and the ISO of your film, let's say you're shooting some black and white 40, or if you're even shooting our black and white negative 100, which by the way has such a wide latitude that you can actually shoot this at 40 ISO and have no problems whatsoever. We'll save that for a different video of what is a reversal film, what is a negative film, and the reasons for each. But for now, I would suggest using a light meter app or a handheld light meter in which you would enter in the ISO of the film, let's say 40, the shutter speed of the camera, 1/30th of a second, and then take an incident, meaning the light that's falling on your subject, with your meter, and the meter will tell you what f-stop to set. It sounds complicated, it's not, and once you get the hang of it, you'll be a pro in no time at all. Believe me, it's true. And let's take a look at some footage that I shot with this very camera, which I loaded up, which, by the way, this camera came recommended by filmmaker Mr. Sam Sherman, who has been a guest on our film photography podcast. We devoted a whole episode to Sam talking about 8mm. I'll put the link to that audio podcast in the notes down below. As with all of our videos, please do consider leaving a comment or subscribing to our channel. Smash that button. Ring that bell for notifications. We can only continue this with you and your participation. Head on over to filmphotographystore.com to pick up fresh 8mm movie film. We also offer developing and scans. It's been great talking to you. It's been great shooting this camera. I had a lot of fun with it. And if you have any questions, drop me a line. Otherwise, I will see you next time.
sir. This is it.
The 1940s Kodak Reliant